Hi, this is Melanie Sage, Assistant Professor at the University at Buffalo School of Social Work, and I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes today about social learning. Social learning is one concept inside of a popular model called the community of inquiry. Community of inquiry talks about presence in the online classroom, and social presence is one type of presence. Community of inquiry has been tested for years as a theory of assessing outcomes and assessing student preference around courses. So, in research using this model, findings frequently indicate that social presence, cognitive presence, and teacher presence is responsible both for student satisfaction in online classrooms and for positive engagement and student outcomes. Social presence refers to the way that the class is connected to each other. So this is about things like cohesion, open communication, that the class is able to express itself emotionally, or students talk to each other peer to peer about their experiences. So ways to create social presence in the classroom include encouraging peer support. For instance, I use Flipgrid, which is video discussion boards. Flipgrid is owned by Microsoft, so it has good protections around FERPA and other things that we sometimes worry about. And through these brief videos, students get a better sense of each other and also respond to each other more directly around emotional needs. And this is really important in social work because we're starting to see how future social workers present themselves in small group and sometimes one-on-one communication, and we get a sense of their communication style and any concerns. One thing that can help support social presence is to step out of message board feedback a little bit. If you respond to every single message, then it becomes a back and forth between the student and the teacher, and students are much less likely to talk to each other. So, for instance, in Flipgrid message forums, I mostly keep out and focus on peer exchange, and I do group feedback occasionally via Flipgrid message board post instead of replying to each person individually to try to set the tone that students are going to answer each other's questions and support each other. Another thing you can do is create social spaces in the classroom that aren't about learning. For instance, you might just have a message forum that is about checking in. What are you up to? I use a forum called Self-Care Share, where I encourage students to share some kind of activity that demonstrates that they're taking care of themselves. And I ask them to do it in the moment if they can. So maybe a little clip of them walking their dog, maybe showing off that they just got their nails done, or some way of demonstrating that we care about self-care around here and we prioritize and sharing it, but it also gives a little way of knowing students outside of just their identity as students, and it helps create that cohesion in the classroom too. Another way to create social presence is to let students co-create content. We have so many great technology tools that allow for collaborative content creation. Of course, there are some inside of our learning management systems like wikis, where students can create an information sheet, for instance, on a topic together. But I like to use tools like Google Docs because these are tools that students can take with them into their workplaces and outside of the classroom. Teacher presence is the extent to which teachers are participating in the class and that students feel like the teacher is there and accessible. But you might ask yourself, do you know who your students are? Do you know who they are as students and beyond their identity as students? One of the classic critiques of online education is that teachers just throw content out there and aren't actively involved or engaged in facilitating the class. And this leads to poor learner satisfaction and frustration. And if you're checked out as a teacher, students are likely to be checked out too. Now, again, this doesn't mean that you should respond to every person every time they say something, and that actually decreases student communication across peer groups. One way that you can demonstrate that you're watching and paying attention is to do group check-ins. And so I usually do this as part of a wrap-up at the end of a week before we move on to the next module. I just do a brief recap. Here's what happened last week. And I individually pull out good input from particular students. I'll say, Janie had some really good comments in explaining how intersectionality works, and I'll use one of their quotes to highlight it. So this is, again, just showing that I'm paying attention to what's going on. I'm helping to facilitate content if something goes wrong. I also send occasional personalized messages out to students. So I don't reply to every message board comment, but every couple weeks I say, here are some things I'm noticing. And in the spirit of pushing everybody just a little further than they were when they started the class, here are some targets that I'd like you to aim toward. So sometimes that means I'd like you to try to focus more specifically on one item that really stuck out to you that was complex in the reading, and try to unpack it for the benefit of your learning, but also the benefit of your colleagues, since we're learning from each other in this environment. Sometimes I have a student who's working in the field, and I'll say, like, your work experience is really valuable, something that not everybody has, something that I don't have perhaps in your particular area, and I need you to bring more of that to the content to facilitate the peer learning. So this is a way for me to support social learning between the classmates, but also to demonstrate my teacher presence, that I'm paying attention. It's great to have video office hours, and some teachers even ask every student to have a 10-minute office hour chat with them at the beginning of the semester. It's a way of honing in on your particular student needs, and also saying, I'm here, here's what an office hour visit looks like. It's not scary, we can just chat with each other, and just creating that comfort and care in that moment is valuable in demonstrating that you care about what's going on. Sometimes we do have to step in and do some facilitation and message boards, and especially we have to be tuned into issues when we're thinking about, like, microaggressions or interpersonal conflict. Often, if a group of students in the class notes that something has gone awry in the classroom, it's good to really acknowledge that as a group in some way, so that students know that the issue is being addressed. Sometimes it's really tempting to email an individual offender specifically and say, careful, don't do this, or sometimes we forget that somebody is also a victim in that circumstance. So one way that we can model dealing with some of those issues as a group is to do that in the classroom, of course, in ways that are sensitive to learners and privacy and all of those things. But sometimes we need to talk about issues publicly when there has been a concern in class. I always encourage some synchronous learning, even if the class is mostly asynchronous. I usually have a live video check-in early in the semester, and at least once a month. It's a way to bring people together and find out how things are going, and get a little kind of taste of the mood in the class and any place that students are getting stuck. And it's always great to have some agenda in advance so that people are thinking about how to get ready for that live meeting, and to have some activities that really couldn't be done so well in an asynchronous way, so that you're using that synchronous time for its full value. Cognitive presence is what we think mostly about when we think about learning in an online classroom. And this is the relationship of the student with the material. So this is where we're looking for exploration and integration, knowledge transfer, that students are able to integrate ideas from multiple sources and that they're doing some critical evaluation. So, we're best trained to do this kind of activity, so it feels more familiar to us. But shifting that in ways that it also meets some of those social presence goals is not too difficult. For instance, I do a weekly reading reflection in my Flipgrid classroom, and I ask students to answer 3 questions. Now, I give them really specific guidelines about these questions. I say, I want you to pick one idea out of one reading that was complicated or that really had some kind of impact on you. Explain, tell us where it came from and your understanding of it in a way that helps with somebody else's understanding of it. And then I ask them to share how this relates to either their present or future work or how they will apply that learning in the future. And then I ask them to say what questions they have about that particular piece of reading that they might need some peer help with. So I ask every student to do 3 responses a week to their peers. And in the peer responses, I also ask for similar meat and depth. I ask them to answer one of those questions that their peers had about something that they were confused about, or to provide a different perspective on the reading or concept, or to apply the concept in a different way to their own lived experience. So we're getting to some social learning, some shared professional experiences. We're asking for transfer of knowledge, and we're asking students to bring in ideas from multiple sources, from their lived experiences or maybe from a previous reading, and applying it to this new concept that they're grappling with in class. Social and connected learning, we're really familiar with social learning theory that people like to learn together. Students really value the sharing of professional experiences across different kinds of experiences. This idea of connected learning is a little bit newer, and this is idea that we should bring in material from beyond the classroom. So this might include one's professional or personal or lived experiences, but it would also include resources, maybe a website or an article that wasn't assigned that somebody brings in and talks about. So that's one way of living the connected learning goals. The other big part of connected learning is teaching students to see their possibilities for other sources of knowledge that extend far beyond classroom material, and to start thinking about their skills for lifelong learning. So one way to do this, for instance, would be to ask students to develop some kind of content for sharing beyond the classroom. And so by creating content for an audience besides the teacher, research shows that students actually work harder. They're not just being evaluated by their instructor for a grade, but their work is going to be out there in the world perhaps, and other people might look at that and it might have some reflection on them. So this can be a meaningful way to improve students' engagement with the assignment and to get better quality work, and also increase the value of the work. One way I've done this is to use infographics as an assignment. So I have students read a research paper, for instance, and then turn it into an infographic. So they have to distill the main points, figure out ways to present it, choose a specific audience, and design for that audience in mind, and add APA format for a reference. So they're still getting to a lot of those learning goals that I might have in a research report, for instance. but then they're sharing it on social media, on Twitter usually. One way that I've scaffolded this learning is that we look at infographics together first and evaluate what's good and bad about them, and then practice as a class evaluating some public infographics against the rubric we're using for class. And then I have them design their own infographic after teaching them how to use free software like Pictochart. And then I have them do a peer exchange as a last step. After they've done the peer exchange and maybe have gotten feedback from me, I ask them to send the infographic to one of the authors of the research paper that they distilled the information from to get feedback. And sometimes this has resulted in no answer, which is not as satisfying, but other times authors have been super enthusiastic and have asked if they could use and share the infographic resource as part of their own work toward disseminating their scholarship. So that's super cool. And students find out that authors of papers are approachable and they can find who they are and send an email. So this is the idea of connected learning. We're using resources outside the classroom, especially social media. These ideas mostly come from the book that I co-wrote with Laurel Iverson Hitchcock and Nancy Smith, Teaching Social Work with Digital Technology. Love to hear your ideas too.